Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final Dolphin Communication Project Deep Dive of 2021. We hope you all have had a wonderful year, despite what I'm sure are challenges. And if you're listening to this and it's already 2022, I hope it's starting out well. Tonight, we are joined by Jackson Ham. He is a PhD candidate at the University of Lethbridge in Canada. He is at the Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience. His research focuses on play in non-human animals, and so he's going to share a bit of his beluga whale work with us tonight. So with that, I will remind folks that you are supposed to be muted. So please don't be surprised by that. You can submit your questions if you're listening live to the program chat. You can submit those directly to Dolphin Communication Project or Kathleen, or you can submit them to everyone. And the last reminder that we are recording. So if you don't want to be visible, please make sure your videos are off. And with that, Kathleen, you can stop your share and we'll pass it over to Jackson.
Thank you, Kel, for that. I should just clarify, I'm only a PhD student. Hopefully I'll be a candidate soon, but just to clarify, just a student for now. Just started my program not too long ago, but thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're at. Thank you for attending my talk. I really appreciate it. So my talk today is titled Let's Play, the Development of Sexual Play in Belugas. And as the title suggests, I'm going to be talking to you today about the development of sexual behavior and sexual play in beluga whales. This work was done in collaboration with SeaWorld of Texas, Dr. Heather Hill at St. Mary's University, Dr. Mullen Lilly at Texas A&M San Antonio, and Dr. Sergio Pellis at the University of Lethbridge. And this work was completed for my master's thesis, which investigated social and non-social play in beluga whales. I'm really excited to share it with you all today. And just before we get started, I also would like to give a big thank you to the Dolphin Communication Project for hosting this webinar and allowing me to share my research with you all today and in the future if you're watching this asynchronously. So first, I'm going to start off by talking about sexual play and sexual behavior rather broadly. So this behavior isn't uncommon in the animal kingdom. A wide range of animals engage in sexual play, from sheep to rats, mouse lemurs, bonobos, chimpanzees, and there's even some evidence that spiders engage in sexual play. And it doesn't stop there. Macaques have been observed engaging in sexual play with one another, and they've been seen engaging in sexual play with deer. Get this. So here you can see, let me move the zoom out of the way. You can see a female macaque mounting a deer. So lots of variety in sexual play. And although many different animals engage in this behavior, it often looks similar. So for example, if you think about your dogs playing, you'll probably recall having seen them engage in some sort of thrusting or humping behavior. And this type of sexual play is common across the animal kingdom. Many animals engage in mounting, riding, and thrusting, and do so at all ages. So for example, here we've got in this picture up here, two young bonobos on the back of their mother. You can see one of the infant bonobos actually mounting another one. So this is at a very young age. And likewise down here, you can see two adult chimpanzees with one mounting the other. So it happens at all ages. And even if it doesn't necessarily look sexual in nature, such as these rats down here, a lot of play is derived from the sexual behavior system, meaning even if it's not directly mounting or thrusting, many of the play behaviors are still part of the full sexual repertoire. So for example, the position here of one rat grabbing the nape of the other, that's a part of sexual copulation in rats. But in this scenario, this is considered sexual play wrestling. And at this point, you might be asking yourself, well, why are these animals doing this? So many different animals are engaging in sexual behavior, including human children. Maybe it's important. And it does seem to be important to many animals and for many different reasons. In many primate species, it seems to relieve both sexual and social tension. So for example, bonobos will engage in more sexual play just before times of feeding when there's increased aggression. And it also seems to be used to manage social relations by both establishing new relations as well as maintaining existing ones. So for example, if a new chimpanzee comes into the troop, one way to get to know that chimpanzee is to engage in sexual play with them. And then once you have gotten to know them, maybe you engage in sexual play frequently to maintain that relationship. So it's a way to check in with one another and see where you're at. It also seems that in some species, there's evidence that sexual play and sexual behavior as a juvenile might actually increase your chances of successful copulation and reproduction as an adult. So it might also be a way for animals to practice sexual behavior. And while all of the previous examples were of terrestrial animals, sexual play is also common in cetaceans. And by cetaceans, I just mean whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So for example, here you can see a humpback mounting another humpback whale. Similarly, a young Yangtze finless porpoise mounts and thrusts towards its mother. Sexual behavior also occurs between species. So here we've got a spotted dolphin thrusting towards a spinner dolphin. And finally, river dolphins exhibit sexual visual displays, such as these river dolphins tossing and slapping objects on the surface of water. This behavior specifically has been suggested to either function as a form of sexual play or as an act of courting behavior. And there are lots more examples within whales, dolphins, and porpoises. This just highlights a few of the species. And sexual play in cetaceans is suggested to aid in bond formation, just like in primates. And specifically, there's evidence for that in bottlenose dolphins and some preliminary evidence for that in belugas, and to increase reproductive fitness, strengthen muscles, and improve coordination. So knowing that sexual behavior is widespread in cetaceans, and specifically sexual play, including baleen whales, such as the humpbacks I showed you, and toothed whales, like river dolphins, we wanted to investigate this behavior in belugas. Belugas are an Arctic-dwelling toothed whale that live in the Arctic waters, just off the coast of Canada, Alaska, Russia, and Greenland. They're a highly social species living in pods of up to 10 to 20 individuals, but will congregate in the summer months in the thousands, as you can see pictured here up in the Canadian Arctic. There are about 20 distinct populations of beluga, and some of which find themselves on the IUCN Red List, meaning that they're endangered or at risk of extinction. This, of course, is influenced by global warming and increased human, boat, and ship traffic in these northern waters. They have a long maturation period and rely on their mother's milk for the first few years of their lives. And evidence suggests that they may even live as long as 40 or 50 plus years. They don't become adults until they're around 10 years old, and this means that they have a really long developmental period, and they remain playful for a really long time. And actually, our work has found that they even remain playful all the way into adulthood. We've seen animals well over 30 years of age playing. And my talk is focused on sexual play in belugas, but I also want to talk just briefly about some of the other play they engage in. So for example, belugas engage in lots of water play, and one really neat example is making these bubble rings. They also play with other objects such as towels or buoy balls that are provided to them in human care settings. They also play with feathers and rocks and kelp in the wild. And they also play social games such as what we call the water spit game, where one animal tosses water and the other tries to catch it. And another social game that they play, we've called it the mouth game, where two belugas will come together and clasp their jaws together as if they're shaking hands. So as you can see, belugas play in a wide variety of ways in both the non-social domain as well as social domain. And this is really just scratching the surface. That they have so many different games that they play. They're highly playful and they're playing all the time. But we'll get back to the sexual play. But I hope you can understand the wide variety of play that belugas engage in. They're really fun animals to watch if you ever get the opportunity to. Okay, let's get back to beluga sexual behavior. So beluga sexual behavior has been described in a few different papers in both the wild and captive settings. And these papers have described the topography of sexual play, the development of sexual play behaviors in older juveniles, and how these behaviors fluctuate seasonally. Previous work has also found that sexual play behaviors are often initiated by older males and are directed towards younger males. However, young juveniles, such as those pictured here, will also engage in sexual play and do so towards their mother, as you can see here, as well as towards objects found in the environment, like this buoy ball down here. And while the structure of socio-sexual behaviors and the development of these behaviors in older juveniles has been previously described, up until this point, we did not know how sexual play behaviors emerged or how they developed over the first 3 years of life. These behaviors are important to learn about because the emergence and how they develop might give clues to the function of sexual play, as well as it allows us to better understand the developmental milestones that young belugas reach over the course of their development. Ultimately, understanding beluga sexual development has consequences for potential breeding programs, assessing the health and development of wild belugas, as well as determining the best housing conditions for animals in managed care. So to learn more about their sexual behaviors, I studied a group of belugas housed at SeaWorld of Texas. My study focused primarily on 9 calves, ranging in age from birth to 36 months old, or the 3-year mark. And over the last 15 years, Dr. Heather Hill has collected weekly video samples of these animals. So I was able to go back through the video archive, looking at 571 videos, which represents around 135 hours of observations to look for these sexual behaviors. And in scoring these videos, I looked for all sexual behavior and all play behaviors, and making particular note of when they first emerged and how they changed over time, as well as who they played with. And you've seen some photos, but I do have 2 really quick videos I wanted to show of belugas engaging in sexual play. So here's a young calf thrusting towards a buoy ball, which I'll play in a second. Here we go. So here you can see a young male lining up a buoy ball and just really gently thrusting towards it. So this is a common form of sexual play. I'll play it once more, just in case it didn't play so smoothly over Zoom. You can see just right there, there's a little thrust with the genital area. Another video I have is a little bit more lively and demonstrates sort of the exuberant nature of some of this sexual play. So here we've got an older male thrusting towards a juvenile male. And I'll play the video. And what you'll see is he gets lined up in vertical position and thrusts towards the juvenile male. And what's really neat about this video, which you might have missed if you weren't looking closely, is right after the thrust, the older male actually creates a bubble ring. So I will play the video and I'll pause it right when there you can see he forms a bubble ring. This is really neat and has further ramifications that I won't touch on here today, but it does suggest that these behaviors are very playful because they're mixing object play and social play. And so it's not purely sexual in nature, it is playful. And what's really neat is you can watch the adult and the juvenile both look at that bubble ring as it moves through the water, and you'll see that the juvenile actually bites it. So let me play it one more time. Start it from here. You can see they both look, and just at the tail end of that bubble ring, you can see the juvenile bite it and pop it. Okay, so let's just get right into the results. So what did I find? Well, first, when I looked at the emergence of sexual behaviors, I found that simple, what I'll call simple behaviors like genital rubbing were the ones that emerged first, whereas more complex behaviors like thrusting and S postures emerged later in life. So this table shows the emergence pattern, and what I've done here is ones represent that it emerged first, two second, and so on and so forth, and an asterisk just represents that it emerged in the same month of life. So what we found is that genital rubs and ventral presentations emerged first for most animals. A behavior called riding, where one animal jumps on the back of another, rubbing their genitals on them, emerged just after that. Horizontal S postures, as pictured here, emerged even later. Thrusting after that, vertical S postures, even after thrusting. And for the animals that we did observe with erections, that was one of the very final behaviors we ever observed. So you can see that these behaviors are sort of emerging in a piecemeal fashion and slowly over time. The other thing to note with this table is that female belugas, which are just at the bottom of the table here, not all females exhibited all of the behaviors that males did. So only one female was seen to do both types of S posture and thrusting behavior, and did so very, very rarely. So this is an important sex difference to note that I'll come back to. And continuing on with looking at piecemeal development, on the last table, if we just hone in on one of these behaviors, like horizontal S postures, and really look at the development of that specific behavior, we'll also find that the development of that behavior is piecemeal. So not only are the development of the overall behavioral repertoire piecemeal, so too are the individual behaviors. And I'll expand on that right now. So in the first few months of life, what we observed was an animal would just simply raise their pectoral fin above the water line, which this is the first sort of step in developing the S posture. Given a couple weeks time, what we'll see is now they are actually completing a ventral presentation, still with the pectoral fin above the water surface, but now actually with their side or their ventral exposed to the animal that they're presenting at. Now we're going to switch to a top-down view to get a better idea of the posturing. You can see again with a couple months, they're now starting to actually curve their body. So in this, they're just fully straight. And finally, another couple months, and they've fully developed the S posture. So this suggests that the development of individual behaviors, as well as the overall sexual play behavior repertoire, develop in small bits in a piecemeal fashion. And so now that you know how that these behaviors are developing in a piecemeal fashion, it's no surprise that the behaviors they engage in change over time as well. So here we have a graph with showing the behavior that male beluga calves engaged in. With on the left y-axis, we have percent of behavior. So out of the genital rubbing, thrusting, presenting, how much did they engage in over a certain period of time? And then on the x-axis, we have age. And the age is in months in 6-month blocks. So I've grouped 6 months just to get a better idea of the development. And what you can see for males is that in the first 6 months of life, they're engaging in genital rubbing and presenting about 50-50% of the time that they're engaging in sexual play. However, as they reach 3 years of age, genital rubbing decreases a lot while thrusting increases. If we look at the females, actually, I'll touch on erections too really quick. You can see that erections didn't start till the second, or rather 13 months old, and were very infrequent. So we only saw 1 or 2 erections throughout the 2 to 3 year age period, which is very interesting because bottlenose dolphins get erections as young as a month old. So very different between species. But now if we look at females, what we notice is a very different pattern. Genital rubbing and presenting remains relatively constant over the 3 years, fluctuating back and forth a little bit, but hovering around 50%, whereas thrusting only occurred in 1 month block and otherwise was almost non-existent. So the difference between male and females that we see here is likely reflecting the differences that we see in adult beluga behavior. So adult males frequently engage in thrusting and presenting, while females really only engage in genital rubbing on other animals or on the environment, as well as occasionally presenting. So this shift in behaviors to increase thrusting is likely reflective of the adult behavior. And indeed, when we looked at the animals from 37 months on, we saw that thrusting continued to increase while genital rubbing decreased and presenting remained around the same at around 50%. So these changes are seen and reflected in adult behavior. And because this is a form of social play, I also wanted to look at who they were playing with. And so to do so, I made egocentric weighted social networks. And this is just to say that these are showing who the calves preferred to play with. So only the play that the calf directed at a partner, not the other way around. So this is just showing how often a calf played with his mother and not how often the mom played with its calf. And these social networks show that there's a clear preference for males to play with their mother and to play with other male calves in the first year of life. This quickly changes in the second year of life, where we see moms not engaging, or sorry, they're not playing with their mom nearly as much. They've really diversified who they're playing with. And finally, in the third year of life, we can see that they prefer to play with other calves and subadult males. However, one thing that sort of confounds all of these data is that they don't always have equal access to each partner. So for example, subadult males aren't always housed in the same pool as the calves. So to determine who they actually prefer to play with when given the choice, so accounting for partner availability, what we find is that male belugas in the first year of life, although they prefer to play with their mom, they really have a strong preference to play with subadult males and other calves. And this preference for older males remains over the second and third year of life, and they continue to prefer to play with calves as well over their mother and other adults. So if we look at females, we find a very similar trend to males when we look at who they were playing with. So they prefer their mother and other calves. Again, their mother preference decreases with age to now they're preferring calves over their own mom. But if we account for partner accessibility and who they truly prefer to play with, what we find is, again, a strong preference for subadult males, a strong preference for other calves, other female calves in the second year of life, as well as subadult males, and then a strong preference for female calves in the third year of life. The other thing you'll probably notice is that the lines here, or the edges in the social networks, are much smaller for females in the third year of life than they are for males. And this is because over time, females actually start to engage in less sexual play, whereas males start to engage in more. And again, this is likely reflecting adult behavior. Adult males engage in lots of sexual behavior, whereas adult females do not. They really prefer to play with objects over social play. So again, we're starting to see, even as young as 3 years of age, their adult their adult behavior reflecting in their juvenile behavior. And so just to sort of summarize the findings I've presented so far, we found that there are sex differences in the behaviors used, as well as in the partners that they're playing with. However, for both male and females, sexual play develops in a piecemeal fashion, with more simple behaviors emerging before the complex behaviors. Perhaps that's because they need to practice sexual behaviors before they can incorporate them into a behavior sequence. Or it may be due just to simply not having the motor and social coordination to achieve those certain behaviors at a young age. So they have to develop to a certain age before they actually have the ability to engage in these behaviors. We're not sure which is true. That will require further investigation. And while the study answers a lot of preliminary questions about sexual play and sexual behaviors, specifically the ontogeny of them, another major question that we have that's left unanswered is, do animals that engage in more sexual play have better reproductive success as adults? This is something we are currently working on, and we'll hopefully have an answer for you in the coming years. But I don't have an answer for you yet on that today. However, another interesting thing that we found was that the speed of development is influenced by the presence of older males and how many older males there are. So this is preliminary and still requires further investigation, but we found that beluga calves that were housed with multiple other adult males developed sexual play behaviors earlier. And that those with access to multiple adult males engaged in more, or the rate at which they engaged in sexual play was higher. Both of which of those things that I just said are described by these illustrative graphs. So this suggests that perhaps they're learning from adult animals, which is why they're developing their sexual behaviors faster when they have the opportunity to be around multiple adult males, or that the increased social arousal is driving this rate of sexual play to be higher, which is then increasing the speed at which they're developing behaviors. We're not sure which is the case, but it is an important finding nonetheless, and should be considered when deciding how to house animals together in human care. So this finding suggests that diverse animal groups should be offered, and this is what SeaWorld is currently doing, but hopefully this is something that people will start practicing across the world. And it's still unclear at this phase if beluga sexual play allows for immature whales to practice sexual behaviors and get better at sexual behaviors. But at the very least, it's not unreasonable to speculate that these behaviors are strengthening muscles and are facilitating bond formation. So young male bottlenose dolphins engage in similar sexual play behavior. And from a very young age, these bottlenose dolphin males will find a particular play partner that they like to play with. And after engaging in lots of sexual play, they form bonds that may last as long as even 10 years. And when we looked at beluga sexual behavior in older animals, we found similar long-lasting preferences in partners. And what this social network illustrates is that older males often prefer the other males. However, they prefer the next eldest male. So here we've got the oldest male preferring the second oldest male, who then likes to play with the male that's just younger than him, and so on and so forth. So sexual play is likely also used in social bond formation and negotiation in belugas as well. And I'm going to keep this short, or this talk rather short, in late December, so we can all enjoy our evening tonight. But in my last slide, I'm going to do my last ditch effort to convince you all that studying sexual play is important and interesting. And so finally, what is the function of sexual play for belugas? Well, it's likely a combination of things. Sexual play is probably used to manage social relations and establish bonds between other juveniles and other animals within the group, as well as establish an early bond with between calf and mother. It might also be used to practice and perfect the behaviors needed for reproduction. It's likely to strengthen muscles, and also it's just fun for the belugas. Like human children, roughhousing on the playground, belugas like to engage in sexual play to entertain themselves. And finally, juvenile social play in rodents has been shown to have an advantageous effect on brain development, and the same could be true for beluga sexual play, something, again, we just don't know. However, understanding these behavioral milestones and the emergence of sexual play can be used to determine if calves in both managed care and in the wild are maturing and developing at a typical rate, and can be used to assess the welfare of both wild and captive populations. And with that, I will end my talk. But just before that, again, I'd like to thank the Dolphin Communication Project for hosting this talk, giving scientists a platform to talk about the work that we do. I need to thank Dr. Sergio Pellis and Dr. Heather Hill for their supervision of my master's thesis and the work that I presented here today. A big thank you to my good friend and collaborator, Dr. Mullen Lilly, who is instrumental in the conception and the ongoings of this project. Thank you to my sister, Nicole Ham, for donating her brilliant talent in creating those illustrations I presented in the talk. And finally, thank you to the staff and trainers at SeaWorld for allowing us to use their facilities to study their animals. None of this work would be possible without them. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jackson. That was a very engaging talk. And as some of you DCP followers know, I did my master's work on the interactions between bottlenose and spotted dolphins. And a lot of those interactions were sexual behaviors. So I'm always intrigued at why social animals choose to play that way. Before we get to questions, we will just pull up our little finale wrap-up slides in case we have any new listeners who aren't sure where to find more DCP webinars. We are on YouTube, of course, Clever Dolphin Communication Project. You can also find all of the recordings on our website under that education tab. Just look under webinars. And then you'll just see the dolphin lessons and the deep dives are all on that same page. So you just look for what you'd like. And then if you've had your fill of webinars, but you need more dolphin content, we have our dolphin podcast, the dolphin pod behind. Oh, I always mess up the mirror image thing there. You can listen to the Dolphin Pod for free wherever you get your podcasts. This is our final webinar of the year, but we hope to be back in 2022 with more programs. And then last but never least, we would be a terrible nonprofit if we didn't let you know that we appreciate your support. So there are all sorts of ways to support us, particularly our Adopt a Dolphin program. If you're listening to this live or the first day the recording is up, there is still time to adopt a dolphin before Christmas if you celebrate. And you can give the gift of membership or a donation. You can also sign up for an eco tour. You can choose DCP as your Amazon Smile charity. And even if you don't choose DCP, everyone who shops on Amazon should start at Amazon Smile. And you can also purchase items from Wanderer Bracelets or Stream to Sea, and those things support us as well. And of course, stay in touch. So there's our website. We are happy that we're able to offer these programs and stay in touch by email and social media as well. So with that, I have a few questions came through. One is kind of a more overarching question, so I think I'll hit that one first. What are the challenges when you're observing the animal's behavior in distinguishing between sexual play and reproduction, mating for the purpose of reproduction?
Yeah, great question. So most of the sexual behavior we actually see in belugas is directed at not sexually mature animals or between not sexually mature animals. So that makes it easy to determine that it's not going to lead to conception. It's not reproductive in nature. So, two animals that are, let's say, 5 years old and 3 years old engaging in some rough and tumble sexual play, pretty safe bet that they don't think that they're reproducing, especially if they're both male and they're not sexually mature yet. We don't see too much sexual play between, if at all, between adult males and adult females. Really, that behavior is quite seasonal and really restricted to reproduction, and we rarely see it. The sexual behaviors that we see frequently and throughout the year are directed towards younger juvenile males most frequently. So it can be difficult, but in the managed care setting where we know all of the individual animals and we can identify them all individually, it's fairly easy to determine between sexual behavior and play behavior, or sexual behavior for the purposes of reproduction and play behavior. It is much more difficult to do that in wild settings when you don't know who's who, especially if you're looking at these big congregations. So up at Cunningham Inlet, where they congregate in hundreds or thousands, if you see the sexual behavior, it's really hard to know unless it's between two really young animals, if that's just play or if it's mating behavior. But great question. Hopefully that helped answer it.
Thank you. Another question was, I hadn't ever thought of it before. The images you showed in the examples you gave of belugas playing with objects, when an object is introduced to their environment, do they kind of automatically play with it, choose to play with it, or do they need a trainer or an older animal to teach them to play with the object?
Good question. So the play that I've talked about here and that we research is all spontaneous, non-trained play. So they will be given a buoy ball, and if an animal chooses to play with it, they will play with it, but not in a pre-trained or facilitated manner. There could be, we've definitely seen, I'll say, adult animals or older juveniles playing with a toy that then, piques the interest of other animals. So now it's sort of the social contagion where they all want to play with the object. So perhaps maybe it does take an older animal to show a younger how to play with an object. However, I do think one area of play that might require some form of teaching, at least in a more obvious way for us as human observers watching them, is in that water spit game that I showed. That does seem to take some practice and doesn't just emerge right away. There's only a few belugas who play it, and the ones who play it are, there's one female who's mostly driving it, and it's her babies that are playing the game with her and not really the other belugas in the population. So I think certain games are, I'll be cautious, but I'll say certain games are learned, whereas others are just totally spontaneous and just happen on their own. But also I'll say, just because it's a brand new object doesn't mean it's an object that they're going to play with or want to play with. So just the fact that it's a novel object on its own doesn't make it totally exciting. But yeah, all of the play behaviors are spontaneous, and they weren't trained by humans. Great question.
Thank you. And then I suspect, even though a lot of people tune into cetacean or dolphin programs and think sharks are the bad guys, DCP does not think sharks are the bad guys of the sea. We know that they're very important. But I'm wondering if this listener perhaps has heard of the S posture as it relates to sharks. Does it have the same function? Did it get the name in belugas and cetaceans from sharks or belugas first? Is that related at all?
Great question. Yeah, that's That's really great. I don't know who used it first, if it was in fish before marine mammals. I'm not sure. Um, that's a good question that I definitely am now am interested and want to look up. Yeah, it is very similar in the topography. I think so. Dr. Mullen Lilly, who's here, and I, as well as Dr. Heather Hill, we're actually working on a paper looking at the topography of S postures, and we actually think that depending on how the body is shaped, that it actually means different things in belugas. So in the S posture, let's see, I have a pen and paper here. I'll draw it. In the S posture, and either, this is not going to be a good drawing.
That's something you will never hear me say. Hang on one second. Let me draw that.
So in the S posture, let me add tails, or a tail and a head. So they can either have their head down and tail up, or they can do the inverse of that, where their head is up and their tail is down. And we actually think these are used in different contexts. So we actually think that one is socio-sexual in nature and one is more agonistic, or saying like, hey, back off, I don't want to interact with you anymore. And how that relates to sharks, I'm not 100% sure yet. In sharks, it is definitely communicative and likely used in a similar manner, but that's a really good question, and you know your stuff, whoever asked that. Yeah, we're looking at, we're still piecing this all together for belugas, and then we'll be comparing it to multiple species like bottlenose dolphin S posturing, and also shark S posturing. Humpback whales also have been noted to do this behavior. So maybe it's just a commonality within fish whale-like body shapes, that's just a go-to way to contort your body to signal something. But great question. I don't know if that answered it at all, but maybe give you some more interesting facts about belugas along the way.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you very much. Kathleen signaled to me that she doesn't have anything to add at the moment. So in the interest of wrapping up, we will do precisely that. And so huge thank you to all of our live listeners, and thank you to everyone who's been listening to the recording. And of course, the biggest thanks of all to you, Jackson. Thank you so much for doing this for us. We're very happy to add it to our archive. So thank you again.
Thank you again for having me. And I'll do one quick plug for your guys' merch. I have a hoodie. I didn't wear it today, but it's super soft. And so everybody should get, at the very least, the DCP hoodie. It's very comfortable. I wear it all the time.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, and you do need to stay warm up there. So good luck with that. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Good night.